Hi, Professor Adam Floridia here, about to go over one of the most important and I'd say most basic lessons when it comes to writing. Sure, essay structure is important, knowing how to structure a thesis and topic sentences and unified organized body paragraphs and coming up with good ideas. But this is going to be more basic than that. All of that's covered in another PowerPoint. This video is intended to go over, I keep using the word basic, but the most basic element of writing, the sentence. So we're going to go over Grammar 101, clauses and sentence structures. I anticipate this video being about 20-25 minutes. Feel free to watch it at 1.5 2 speed and make me sound really squeaky, but you can always go back to it, pause, rewind, and go over things that you might need a little more clarification on. So here we go. We're going to start with some definitions. What's a sentence? I'm not going to wait patiently, just go ahead and pause and come up with your answer. But here's the definition of a sentence. It's actually surprising how few people can come up with the definition. A sentence is a group of words with both a subject and a verb that expresses a complete thought. Okay, can you come up with an example of a sentence? And again, you can pause if you want. Here's my example. The huge gray dog ran quickly down the long, narrow street. Or even just, the dog ran. Both of those have a subject, dog, a verb, ran, and both express a complete thought, even though one is more detailed than the other. To see if it expresses a complete thought, I read it out loud. And I say, okay, can that stand alone? Can I go up to somebody on the street and say this to them and have it make sense? They might look at me weird, but I can go up and say, the huge gray dog ran quickly down the long, narrow street. That expresses a complete idea. I could go up to somebody and say, the dog ran. It's a much simpler sentence, much less detail, but it still expresses a complete thought. When you're looking to find out if it has a subject and a verb, it is helpful for you to actually be able to identify the subject and verb. That way you're sure that the sentence or group of words has a subject and a verb. I find it easiest to find the verb first. That's usually easiest for most students. Verbs tend to stand out more because you think of them as action words or state of being words. Is, am, are, was, were, do, does, did, may, might, must, can, could, shall, should, will, would, etc. Anyway, so I'm going to look for my verb. It's ran. That's the action word. After you find the verb, to find the subject, it's really easy. Just ask who or what of the verb. So for example, ran. Who or what ran quickly down the long narrow street? Oh, it was the huge gray dog. So simple subject is dog. Dog ran. Here it's a lot easier. There's a lot fewer words, but I got ran as my verb. Who or what ran? The dog. Dog is my subject. Ran is my verb. The dog ran. That expresses a complete thought. Okay, now we're going to get into some other definitions. We're going to talk about clauses. The definition of clause isn't up here, but a clause is a group of words with both a subject and a verb. And there are two types of them. That's what we are going to go over. The first type of clause is the independent clause, which I'll abbreviate with an I for independent. An independent clause is a group of words with both a subject and a verb, because all clauses have a subject and a verb, and it can stand alone. That definition sound familiar? It should. It's a complete sentence. An independent clause is a complete sentence. Has a subject, has a verb, can stand alone. If you want an example, please see above, or come up with any number of sentences. Okay, if we have independent clause, can you guess what the second type is? Dependent clause. I'm going to abbreviate that with a D. A dependent clause is a group of words with both a subject and a verb that cannot stand alone. It's always going to be a sentence fragment. A sentence fragment is an incomplete sentence. It's an incomplete thought. Easy to remember these two, the distinction between these two. If you're an independent person, you can live on your own, you can be out on your own, you can do things on your own. You're independent. You don't need someone else to support you. Same thing. It's a group of words that has a subject and a verb and can stand alone. They can be out on their own. Dependent clause, that subject and verb can't stand alone. There's not enough information. It's not a complete thought. So dependent, it needs something else. It needs more. Come up with an example of a dependent clause. So a lot of students will say something like, in the park. Not a dependent clause. That is a sentence fragment. It is not a complete sentence, but it doesn't have a subject and a verb, so it's not a dependent clause. A dependent clause still needs that subject and verb. Going to the movies. Not a dependent clause. So how do we come up with a dependent clause? Here's an example. Trick is actually usually start with an independent clause and add a word to it. It seems counterintuitive because if a dependent clause can't stand alone, it feels like it should have less than an independent clause. But it actually usually has one word more. So, example, when the huge gray dog ran. If I go, it has its subject, dog, it has a verb, ran, But if I go up to somebody and say, when the huge gray dog ran, they'll look at me and say, go on, what happened? What happened when the huge gray dog ran? Or after the dog ran, same thing. You can hear how if you read it out loud, it needs more information. It's not a complete thought. But still, it's a dependent clause, so it has the subject, dog in both of those. It has the verb, ran, but that one extra word at the beginning turns it into an incomplete thought. And we'll talk about why you want to actually know how to use dependent clauses. They will come in handy, so we'll get to that. There are some words called subordinating conjunctions. Don't care if you remember that term, subordinating conjunctions. Just know that these are the words that you can place in front of an I, an independent clause, in order to magically presto changeo, turn it into a D, a dependent clause. And there's a list. Don't expect you to memorize this at all, but having a couple of these handy in your mind helps. Put any one of these in front of a sentence, in front of an independent clause, and it suddenly becomes an independent clause. I am recording a video. Independent clause. Subject I, verb am recording. It can stand alone. I am recording a video. Add any of these words to the beginning of it, and that independent clause becomes a dependent clause. After I am recording a video, although I am recording a video, as I am recording a video, as if I, and etc. I won't read through them all. But throw any of those words in front of an independent clause to make it a dependent clause. Important to recognize then, if you are starting a sentence with one of these words, you're starting with a dependent clause, which means you're setting yourself up for a sentence fragment unless you know how to finish it. And again, that's what we're going to get to. There are another type of conjunctions we're going to talk about, and those are called coordinating conjunctions. I abbreviate those with a little C for coordinating conjunction. These I do want you to memorize. You should know these. There are only 7 of them. They are one of 7 special words that come after a comma to combine two I's, two independent clauses. You can remember them with the mnemonic device fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys. You can remember fanboys, or you can do what I still remember, maybe dread to this day, thinking about my 9th grade English teacher had us sitting in his classroom, and for it had to be 15 minutes, seemed like an eternity. We just sat there and said, and, but, or, nor, for, so, yet. And, but, or, nor, for, so, yet. And, but, or, nor, for, so, yet. And to this day, that stupid little tune is stuck in my head, but I've never forgotten my coordinating conjunctions. And, but, or, nor, for, so, yet, or for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Doesn't matter how you remember them, but remember those 7 special words. They will help you prevent run-on sentences. They are important. There are only 7 of them in the entire English language out of the 453,672,000 words we have. I made that number up. These 7 are the only coordinating conjunctions, only words that can come after a comma to separate two independent clauses. Okay, so there's your definitions. Now let's see why this stuff is important, why we should know this stuff. Oh, I got one more note down here. Don't start sentences with any of these words with coordinating conjunctions. They're not transition words to start sentences. They are the only 7 words that can come after a comma to combine 2 sentences. Now, you might say, Adam, I've seen in professional writing, authors start sentences with and or start sentences with but. And it is fine. You technically can do that. I'm going to ask you in academic writing, don't do that, because to me that shows me that you don't really know how to use coordinating conjunctions. If you have one sentence and then you start the next sentence with and or but, I would say, why are you starting a new sentence? Instead, just change the period to a comma, lowercase the and or the but, and all of a sudden you've used it like a coordinating conjunction should be used. No, I'm not going to link to this video or anything, but you can also go watch the classic Schoolhouse Rocks video where they sing a song about conjunction, junction, what's your function? Hook. I won't do the whole thing, but Schoolhouse Rocks, an oldie but a goodie. All right, now moving on. So, sentence structures. There are 6 basic sentence structures in the English language. I should modify that to say there are 6 basic sentence structures that this particular professor wants you to know. There's an infinite number of different ways to combine sentences. These are some forms that I want you to be familiar with. The reason for this is that using different structures for sentences makes the writing more interesting, it makes it flow more smoothly, and it helps ideas transition. For example, imagine how painful it would be reading an essay that was all simple sentences. A simple sentence is subject, verb, complete thought. Jack was bored. He went to the park. He saw Susie. They went on the swings. They had fun. It was a great day. See how that reads really boring? I had fallen asleep just reading it. I mean, that's what little kids' books are written because they're just learning to read, so they're starting with these little simple sentences. Now, watch out if I vary the sentence structures. I can at least make that still same boring little story sound a little more interesting and less like a list. Jack was bored, so he went to the park. When he saw Susie, they decided to go on the swings. They had fun. It was a great day. Yeah, I read it in a different voice too, but it's amazing how just changing how I punctuated this makes it a difference. This looks like it was written by a first grader. My kindergarten daughter could write this, and this looks like, ooh, this might have been written by a college student or something. So some of it is just making writing look and sound more scholarly, more professional, less elementary. All right, so six sentence types that I want you to know. There's the simple sentence. A simple sentence is one independent clause. So this is technically actually two simple sentences. An independent clause, subject, verb, complete thought, period. And then you would move on to your next simple sentence, subject, verb, complete thought, period. Jack was bored. That's an independent clause. That's a simple sentence. It's a sentence made up of one independent clause. And notice my little, I guess, I don't know what you call it, abbreviation here, an I period. That's independent clause, period, independent clause. And then I have that written there. This will make a lot more sense. We'll go over some samples. Okay, after the simple sentence, there is the compound sentence. A compound sentence is made up of two or more independent clauses. So we have an independent clause, and then a comma, and then a C for coordinating conjunction, and but or nor for so yet, for and nor but or yet so, fanboys, and then another independent clause. An example of that would be, let's see, Jack was bored, comma, so he went to the park. I have my independent clause, Jack was bored. I have my comma. I have my coordinating conjunction, so, and I have my other independent clause, he went to the park. It's another type of compound sentence, which is still a sentence with two or more independent clauses, and that is independent clause, semicolon, independent clause, and period at the end. Show of hands. Raise your hand if you know how to use a semicolon. Okay, yeah, I can't see you. So I wonder, usually if I ask this in class, how many people feel confident that they know how to use a period? Almost everybody raises their hand. You should know how to use a period by now. You're in English 101 in college. Semicolon, though, it's usually half the class or less. And here's your lesson on how to use a semicolon. Look at the difference between number 1 and number 3. The only difference is I have an independent clause separated by a period from another independent clause versus separated by a semicolon from another independent clause. There is no difference. Semicolons work just like periods. I shouldn't say there is no difference. There are minor differences. If you use a semicolon, you're not going to capitalize the first letter of your next word. And technically, this is one sentence still. Number 3 is a compound sentence. It's one sentence. The semicolon is a longer pause, where the period is a full stop. Either way, though, if you use a semicolon, you need a complete sentence to the left of it, and you need a complete sentence to the right of it. So anywhere that you use a semicolon, you should be able to use a period. If you cannot use a period there, you cannot use a semicolon there. It's that easy. Okay, we're going to get a little fancier. This is really a variation of rule number 3. It's just another type of compound sentence. Looks really complicated, but independent clause, then a semicolon, then a TR is going to stand for transitional word, and then a comma, and then another independent clause. So quickly think of a list of transitional words. Okay, good. You'll come up with stuff like however, furthermore, moreover, first, second, next, finally, consequently, all of those types of words. And if I asked you, if you start a sentence with one of those words, with however or consequently, what do you do after that word? I'm sure you would say you put a comma. Usually people just know that. And if you didn't know that, you put a comma after those words. So that's all this formula is. Number 4 is you have a sentence, an independent clause, and then you have a semicolon to get ready for your next independent clause. But that second independent clause, you're going to start with a transition word. And of course, because you're starting an independent clause with a transition word, it gets a comma after it, and then the rest of the independent clause. Again, hopefully this is making some sense. I'm trying to explain it as best I can. There will be samples coming up, so it hopefully will seem easier when you actually see how this applies. All right, that's it for compound sentence. Last type of sentence is the complex sentence. This is why knowing dependent clauses are important, because while they cannot stand alone, they can't be on their own, they do work when they have support from an independent buddy. So there's the dependent clause, comma, independent clause sentence, or just switch it around and the independent clause, dependent clause sentence. Notice the only difference: if the dependent clause comes first, it gets a comma after it. If the dependent clause comes second, there's no comma in the sentence. So those are your 6 sentence types to practice incorporating into your writing. Don't worry, it's not as confusing as it looks. Here's an example of how to write the exact same thing those 6 different ways. So my independent clause is I went to the party, period. My other independent clause is I had fun, period. Let's see, does this have a subject and a verb? Let's see, the verb is went. Who or what went to the party? I. Can I say this out loud and have it stand alone? I went to the party. Yep, checks out. Verb is had. Who or what had fun? I. It's got a subject I. It's got a verb had. Can I say this and have it make sense? I had fun. Yep, checks out. I have 2 independent clauses, so I have 2 simple sentences here. I don't want to sound like a first grader though, so I don't want to write 2 simple sentences. Let's be a little more advanced. Let's try this as an independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent clause. I went to the party, copying my independent clause. Then I know I put a comma, because there's a comma in the formula. Then I know I need a C, coordinating conjunction, for and, nor, but, or, yet, so, and, but, or, nor, for. So yeah, I'm going to choose and makes sense there. And then I need my other independent clause. Or, I don't feel like using coordinating conjunctions. I want to try this new semicolon thing now that I feel confident with that. So on the left, I went to the party. There's my independent clause. Then I have a semicolon. Then on the right, I had fun. There's my other independent clause. Can I put a period here? Yeah, I did in sentence 1, so I know a semicolon will work as well. One reason to use a semicolon is if usually actually I use them if I have 2 simple sentences like this and I don't want to make my sentence any more detailed or any more elaborate. It's just a difference of if I write it in way 1 with a period, it looks like a first grade sentence, where if I use a semicolon, suddenly it looks fancier. Some teachers may have told you or will tell you that you should only use a semicolon when the 2 sentences are, or the 2 independent clauses are really closely related to one another. And I agree with that, but I would argue that whenever you have one sentence following another, the 2 sentences should be closely related. You don't have a sentence and then in your next sentence start talking about something completely different and completely random. That wouldn't be good writing to begin with. So I really do think you can use semicolons just about everywhere. You can use periods. That said, please don't throw semicolons all over the place. After I give this lesson, usually there's at least one student who just has semicolons all over his paper, and half the time a lot of them are used incorrectly because they're not complete thoughts on either side. They're not independent clauses, and other than that, it's just writing with a whole bunch of semicolons. You want to vary. You want, the whole reason you don't want to have all simple sentences is not only does it look sort of elementary and juvenile, but it's boring to read. You want to vary things up. All right, moving on to the next one, number 4. Independent clause, I went to the party. Semicolon, semicolon. Transition word, I'm going to choose moreover. I know after my transition word I need a comma, so I put my comma, and then my other independent clause, I had fun. I went to the party, semicolon, moreover, comma, I had fun. Now into my complex sentences. Dependent clause. Remember, how do I make a dependent clause? I take my independent clause, I went to the party, and I add one of those subordinating conjunctions to the beginning of it. And suddenly this independent clause, I went to the party, becomes a dependent clause. Because I went to the party, notice how that can't stand alone. I can't come up to you and say, because I went to the party. But if I finish it, according to this formula, with a comma and then an independent clause, it's a good sentence. This is actually one of my favorite sentences to use. I use these all the time. Because I went to the party, comma, I had fun. How many of you have had teachers tell you can't start sentences with because? Okay, I bet you a lot of you raised your hands, or aren't raising your hands because you're ignoring that part. Anyway, the reason teachers told you that is, no offense, they thought you were too dumb to do it right. You absolutely can start a sentence with because, if you know how to do it. If you don't understand dependent clauses, and you just start a sentence with because and don't know that you have to finish it with a separate independent clause, you'll end up with a fragment. So your teachers wanted you to avoid fragments. So you can't just say, because I went to the party, because I'm talking on this video, because I love grammar. All of those are dependent clauses and they're sentence fragments. Those would be marked incorrect in a paper. But if I add an independent clause to the end of it, then it's fine. Because I went to the party, I had fun. Because I like grammar, this isn't as tedious as it seems, etc., etc. And then our last one was remember, reversed ID. It doesn't have a comma. So just to make it make sense, I'm going to switch the order of these, and I had fun because I went to the party. So hopefully that doesn't seem that difficult. Hopefully it's making sense. Um, we'll be wrapping up soon. First, an important summary. You cannot separate two sentences, independent clauses, with just a comma. Don't know if you can hear the banging. That's me banging on my desk. You can't do it. It's a run-on sentence. In academic writing, you cannot use a comma to separate two complete thoughts, two complete sentences, two independent clauses. Example, I went to the party, comma, I had fun is wrong. I will mark that as a run-on. Technically, it's called a comma splice. A comma splice is a specific type of run-on. Why bother using two different words? I'm just calling it a run-on. So it's a run-on sentence. So how do you fix that? Well, that's why coordinating conjunctions are so important. They're the only 7 words that can be used after comma to combine sentences. Memorize those 7 words. Example, I went to the party, comma, so I had fun. I went to the party, comma, and I had fun. I didn't go to the party, comma, but I had fun. I had fun, comma, for I went to the party. I know for is kind of weird. We don't really use that, but it means because, more or less. I didn't go to the party, comma, yet I had fun. I neither went to the party, comma, nor did I have fun. I could either go to the party, comma, or I can have fun. Notice that every time I use a comma in coordinating conjunction, it's to separate two independent clauses. Some of these words, and, for, so, or, are not always coordinating conjunctions. That means that just because you had this lesson, you're like, oh, good, Adam told me and is a coordinating conjunction, so I'm going to put a comma before it. Not true. And is a coordinating conjunction when it is used to separate two complete thoughts, when it's used to separate two complete independent clauses. So that's when you put a comma before it. If I just say Steve and Joe went fishing, I would not say Steve, comma, and Joe went fishing, because Steve is not a sentence on its own and is being used to connect two names there. So you do have to make sure, kind of test the left and test the right. I went to the party. Let's see, verb went, who or what went, I went to the party. Yep, that's a sentence. Let me test the right side of it. I had fun. Verb is had, who or what had, I had fun. Okay, subject verb, that's a complete thought. Ooh, I have two complete sentences and I'm using a comma to separate them. That means I'm going to need a coordinating conjunction with it, or I'm going to use a coordinating conjunction, so I need the comma with it. Moving on, when you move from one sentence to the next, using a d comma I sentence is very effective because it adds both variety and transition. Notice I said there's an infinite number of sentence structures in reality. Here, this sentence that I just read is a d comma id sentence. It's a dependent clause followed by a comma, followed by an independent clause, followed by a dependent clause. See if you can pick them out. When you move from one sentence to the next, dependent clause, using a d comma I sentence is very effective, independent clause, because it adds both variety and transition, dependent clause. And note there I combined the two types, and the difference is when the dependent clause comes first, it gets a comma after it. When the dependent clause comes second, as in because it adds, there is no comma between effective and because. I don't care if you memorize the names of the different sentence types. I care that you work on incorporating them into your writing. There's an example of an I semicolon, I sentence. And note, again, a semicolon is really nothing more than a fancy looking period. There needs to be a complete sentence to the left and a complete sentence to the right. I don't care if you memorize the names of the different sentence types. What's my verb? Care or do care. Who or what doesn't care if you memorize I. So subject verb is this complete thought. I don't care if you memorize the names of the different sentence types. Yep, that's a sentence. I care. Okay, verb is care. Who or what cares? It's I. I care that you work on incorporating them into your writing. That's a sentence. I have two complete sentences. I have two independent clauses, so I need to throw a semicolon between them. Or a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Or a period. That's going to be how you fix run-on sentences. Those are the three main ways, and we're going to go over that in a run-on lesson coming up. So why don't you practice? Try writing these sentences all 6 ways. Don't come up with your own sentences. Do as little thinking here as possible. Copy my independent clauses. I gave them to you. So for number 2, it's going to be I studied hard, then you put a comma, then you put a coordinating conjunction, and then you copy the other independent clause, I passed the test. Take a second, pause, write those down, see if you can do that, and then resume, and you'll see my answers. I studied hard, period, I passed the test. Goes to I studied hard, comma, so I passed the test. Complete sentence to the left, complete sentence to the right. Next, I studied hard, semicolon, I passed the test. Complete sentence to the left, complete sentence to the right. A little bit fancier, I studied hard, semicolon, therefore, comma, I passed the test. You didn't have to choose the same transitional word as me. You didn't have to choose the same coordinating conjunction as me up in number 2. But as long as you have the form right. Then the complex sentences, remember I needed to change my independent clause, I studied hard, into a dependent clause. So I'm actually going to add a word because it's a safe one to go with. This is your chance. Whenever you need a dependent clause, go with the one that your teachers told you not to start with. Start with because I studied hard, comma, I passed the test. And then flip it for number 6, I passed the test because I studied hard. So hopefully that makes sense and allows you to vary your sentences more so that you're not writing all simple sentences or all compound sentences. Or, like I said, I use number 5 a lot, the D comma I sentence. So after I write something during editing and revision, I go back and make sure I don't have sentence after sentence after sentence starting with because of this, blah, 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 this, or when this happens, da, 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 this happens, because I don't want to use the same structure over and over again. And that's it. So practice incorporating those into your writing, and good luck. Let's see, how did I do? 26 minutes.